The world tore apart. It wasn't a slow collapse. It wasn't like one of those movies where everything happens in a sequence. No, this hit fast. So fast that I didn't have time to think. 1 second, everything was normal. I was sitting on the roof of my building, watching the sky shift colors as the sun began to set. The city was peaceful, nothing unusual about it. Then the sound came, a low rumble, a deep, bone-shaking growl, like the earth itself was groaning. Before I could even process it, the sky cracked open, shattered. One giant tear down the middle, and fire poured out like it had been hiding there all along. I couldn't make sense of it. The air turned thick and heavy, filled with the sharp sting of smoke. I felt the heat hit me before I even knew what was happening. Then I saw it. Huge chunks of burning rocks falling from the sky. They weren't tiny meteors or stars burning up. These were massive, the size of buildings, streaking through the air in a blinding blaze of orange and red. I stood frozen for a second, just staring at the sky. The sight was too big for my brain to even begin processing. The rumbling got louder, the ground beneath my feet shaking like a bomb had gone off. Then, everything went dark. I turned and sprinted, my heart hammering in my chest. People were running too, but they didn't know where to go. There was no safe place. As I ran down the stairs, I saw the first building collapse. A skyscraper, one of the tallest in the city, crumbled like it was made of cardboard. The impact of the fire asteroid that hit it shook the street like a giant hand had slammed down. Glass, metal, and stone shattered, raining down on anyone unlucky enough to be in its path. I tried to scream at people, to warn them, but the noise was unbearable. Explosions, cracking buildings, the earth itself groaning under pressure. I stumbled, the ground buckling beneath me, and I could barely keep my balance. It was as if the whole city was being dragged under, piece by piece. In the distance, I saw more destruction. Fires spreading across buildings, flames licking at the sky, and the sounds of sirens trying to cut through the chaos. The streetlights flickered, and I could hear the muffled cries of people trapped in their cars. This was happening everywhere. I ran through a narrow alley, trying to avoid falling debris. But every time I thought I was safe, the ground cracked open under my feet. It wasn't like a normal earthquake. The ground split open. I could see deep, jagged fissures opening, swallowing cars, light posts, even entire blocks of buildings. The air stank of burning rubber, chemicals, and something worse, something I couldn't place. It was too hot. I felt my skin burning as I ran through the streets, my breath coming in short, sharp gasps. I saw a woman trying to pull her child out from under a heavy beam. Her face was covered in dirt and blood, and the child's small hand clung desperately to hers. I moved to help them, but before I could reach them, there was another explosion. The shockwave hit me so hard it knocked me off my feet. The blast sent me flying through the air, and when I landed, the world around me was even worse. The sound of buildings falling, of people screaming, of fire raining down from the sky, it was all too much. I tried to get up, tried to keep moving, but the ground was shaking too violently. I looked up and saw something strange. A giant clock was hanging in the sky above the ruins of the city. But this wasn't a normal clock. At first, I couldn't understand what I was looking at. Why was there a clock in the sky? What did it mean? But I couldn't focus on that. There was too much happening. The flames, the falling buildings, the sky itself splitting apart. I kept running, hoping to find shelter, but I had no idea where to go. I found myself near a tall building, a place that seemed solid. I ducked inside, but the ground shook so violently I thought the building would collapse on top of me. I heard the cracks forming in the walls, the entire structure groaning. I couldn't tell if it was the building about to fall or if the earth itself was giving way beneath it, so I ran outside again. I was still running when the ground cracked beneath me. It happened so fast. One moment, I was trying to make my way through the city, and the next, the streets seemed to split open like they were nothing more than paper. The force of the explosion sent me flying, and I barely caught myself on the edge of a shattered building. My hands scraped against concrete, my legs burning with every movement. The world was shaking so violently that it felt like the entire earth was being ripped apart. I could barely see through the dust and smoke. The air was thick and hot, almost suffocating. Fire was raining down from the sky, small asteroids of flame crashing into buildings, turning them into burning wrecks. The sound of metal, screaming, concrete crumbling, and glass shattering mixed with the horrifying roar of the earth itself. It was like the planet had decided it was done with us. I looked up, trying to make sense of the chaos. The sky was full of fire. these small fiery rocks falling from above like it was an endless shower. I saw one of them hit the top of a skyscraper, the explosion so bright it nearly blinded me. I could feel the heat from here, the air burning around me, like the planet itself was trying to scorch us alive. "Get out of the way," someone screamed. I didn't even recognize the voice. I turned around just as a piece of the building I'd been near collapsed, sending a cloud of dust and debris flying in all directions. I jumped back, but I wasn't fast enough. A piece of glass from a nearby window sliced through the air, cutting across my arm. I gritted my teeth, trying not to scream. I couldn't stop moving. There was no time to think, no time to wonder how this was happening. All I knew was that I had to run. Run from the fire, run from the destruction, run from the end of everything. The streets were full of people, but they were all in panic too. I heard people screaming, calling out for loved ones. A woman near me was clutching a child, both of them crying as they ran. Another man ran past, his clothes singed from the heat. The ground rumbled again, a deep, earth-shaking tremor that made my knees feel weak. There was no safe place, no escape. The buildings around me were falling like dominoes, pieces of concrete and steel crashing down, burying anyone unlucky enough to be caught in the path. So deze is een corridors in Rory or Opers Kupfos, screaming from inside, entwined, but there was no way to help them. I had to keep moving. I tried to duck into an alleyway, hoping to find some shelter from the falling debris, but it only led to more destruction. The alley was filled with debris and dust, and the ground beneath my feet cracked open even more, like it was swallowing the city whole. I ran, tripping over fallen rubble, my legs aching, but I couldn't stop. I looked up again, and that's when I saw it, the ground splitting wide open. A massive crack had formed in the street ahead of me, and I could feel the ground shaking under my feet as the earth itself started to split further apart. Buildings on either side of the crack tilted at impossible angles like they were going to topple into the chasm below. I could hear the sound of the earth groaning, a deep, terrifying noise that shook my bones. It was like the planet was alive, and it was angry. "Help! Somebody help!" A voice echoed through the chaos. I turned and saw a man stuck between two fallen pieces of concrete, his legs pinned beneath them. I tried to move toward him, but a loud rumble shook the ground again. The buildings around us seemed to lean in closer, ready to crush everything. I froze, my heart pounding. There was no way to help. The whole city was coming down around us. I could barely hear the sirens anymore. Just the sound of the earth cracking and splitting open. I glanced up again and saw another fire asteroid fall from the sky, its fiery tail lighting up the smoke-filled air. It hit a nearby building, sending a shockwave of flames in every direction. I had no choice but to run again, my legs pushing through the debris and the smoke. I didn't know how much longer I could keep going. The world was falling apart. The city I had known, the life I had known, it was all disappearing. I tried to find shelter in a building, but the walls were already shaking, the windows cracking. I heard more explosions in the distance, and I realized with a sickening feeling that the disaster wasn't just here. It was everywhere. The entire city was being swallowed by the chaos. Fire, earthquakes, the sky breaking apart. It was like nothing in the world could hold together anymore. And then I saw it. A giant crack opened in the ground directly ahead of me. It was too wide to jump over, too deep. The earth beneath me was no longer solid. I had no choice but to turn and run in another direction, hoping it wouldn't swallow me whole. I felt like I was running in circles. There was no way out, no way to survive this. I don't know how long I kept running. Time didn't make sense. The disaster felt endless, like it had been going on forever, and would continue to rip the world apart. The city was breaking. The earth was breaking, and I didn't know if anyone else would make it out alive. Suddenly, a large fiery asteroid was rushing towards me, and it hit me perfectly. I was sure I'd wake up in a coffin. When I woke up, I thought for sure I was dead. The last thing I remembered was an explosion of light. The asteroid had hit me square in the chest, and for a split second, I saw everything flash. The pain, the heat, the deafening roar as the world around me disintegrated. Then nothing. Just darkness. But now I was back. My eyes fluttered open and I realized with a jolt that I was lying in a hospital bed. The sterile bright lights above me made my head spin. I could hear the faint beeping of machines and my body ached. But there was no fire. No chaos. No destruction. I blinked again, confused. Was this a dream? Had the disaster not happened at all, or had it all been some strange nightmare? I sat up slowly, feeling dizzy. The room was empty, but the door opened soon after. A nurse walked in, her face cheerful. She told me that I was found unconscious in the city after, well, the crazy storm. We think you had some kind of injury from debris. You were out for a while, but you're okay now. So, a storm? What was she talking about? I could barely remember the last few hours. The fire asteroids, the city cracking open, my whole world falling apart. Do you remember anything about the fire? I asked, my voice trembling. Buildings falling down, the sky splitting open? She paused, looking at me with a strange, almost nervous smile. She just looked at me with a concerned, yet cheerful expression. She mentioned that the storm was the big thing people are talking about, but that's it. My heart raced. This wasn't making sense. I was sure, so sure, that I had witnessed something far worse, something catastrophic. I had seen buildings crumble, people screaming, the earth splitting in two. But now, no one remembered, no one except me. I needed to know what was happening. I got out of bed, my legs shaky, and found the nearest exit. The hallways of the hospital were crowded with people, but no one seemed worried. There were no signs of destruction, no burnt walls, no rubble in the streets. I stumbled outside, desperate to find someone who could confirm the disaster had really happened. I ran to the nearest police officer standing by a patrol car, hoping he'd be different. "Excuse me, officer," I shouted, rushing up to him. "You remember what happened yesterday? The fire asteroids, the buildings falling down?" He gave me an odd look, almost as if I'd asked him if the sky was green. "Buddy, are you all right? There was no disaster, no fire. You must have had a bad dream or something. Get some rest." I couldn't believe it. What was happening? I stepped back, trying to process his words, but my mind was spinning. I ran to the Ursor, to the Zustanari de Niranor, Ekisnkas, at the Seoul news station, bursting through the doors, and I approached a reporter who was standing with a camera crew, waiting for her turn to speak. "Up, please," I said, breathless. You remember what happened? The fire? The sky falling apart?" The reporter stared at me like I was insane. What? You need to calm down. We're all just trying to get the story straight. Nothing like that's happened. Okay?" I looked around at the staff. They were all busy, talking about minor accidents or the weather. Nothing about a catastrophe. Frustration boiled up inside me. But how can you not remember? The whole city was falling apart. You must have seen it. The fire asteroids were raining down. One of the cameramen laughed. "Wow, this guy really thinks he saw something, huh?" he said to the crew, and they all chuckled. I was being dismissed, mocked. They were laughing at me, like I was some kind of joke. The reporter turned back to the camera, cutting me off. "And now, folks, a man who claims to have witnessed something, let's just say, unusual. Don't go anywhere." I felt my blood run cold. Before I knew it, I was back outside, overwhelmed by the sense that no one believed me, no one would, and I kept asking people, any person I could find. A woman at a coffee shop, a man on the street, a jogger in the park. Nobody remembered. It wasn't just disbelief. It was mockery. They treated me like a child, as if I were making up some wild story for attention. Some called me delusional. Others looked at me with pity. And then people started recording me. By the end of the day, my face was all over the internet. Videos of me ranting about fire asteroids, collapsing buildings, and the earth breaking into pieces were going viral. I was being tagged in countless memes. My name was everywhere, and the whole world seemed to be laughing at me. The mockery was unbearable. Everywhere I went, people laughed at me. It wasn't just the news stations or social media. It was in the streets, at the store, even at the hospital. No one cared about what I'd seen. Everyone just wanted to forget, and I was the only one who couldn't. I stopped trying to talk to the authorities after they told me I was just stressed or suffering from trauma. Everyone assumed I'd gone crazy, that I was living in some delusional nightmare of fire asteroids and falling cities. But the thing was, the more I heard people deny it, the more certain I became that the destruction I witnessed was real. It didn't matter how many people mocked me. It didn't matter how many memes they made. I knew what I saw. Then just when I was beginning to think I had lost my mind entirely, something strange happened. It started when I was walking through the park, trying to clear my head. People were going about their usual business, jogging, walking dogs, chatting with friends. The world had gone back to normal, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was the only one still stuck in the past, trapped in the disaster that no one else remembered. I was lost in thought when I heard a voice behind me.
Excuse me?
I turned around to see a young woman standing there. She had short, messy hair, like she had just rolled out of bed, and wore an old band tee and jeans. She looked at me like she was trying to make sure I was the right person.
You're the guy.
She said, pointing at me.
You're the one they call Fire Asteroid Guy, right?
I froze. Yeah, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. That's me.
I remember it.
She said, almost as if she was whispering to herself.
I remember everything.
My heart skipped a beat. Wait, what? The woman nodded.
The sky, the fire, the buildings falling. I remember it all.
She looked around, almost as if she was checking to see if anyone was listening.
But no one else does. Everyone says it's just some kind of weird storm, but it's not. It was real. I was there too.
I couldn't believe it. Someone else? Finally, someone who knew. I stared at her, trying to process what she was saying. You remember? I repeated, almost as if I needed her to say it again to make sure I wasn't dreaming. You saw it too?
Yeah.
She said, her voice steady now.
I was on the other side of town. When the ground cracked open and the fire started falling, I ran to my mom's house to make sure she was okay. I didn't make it in time. It felt like I was the only one running from the end of the world. But when I woke up, no one remembered anything.
My mind was racing. And you're the only one? The only one who remembers it?
Pretty much,
She said, her voice heavy.
I asked people too. Everyone thinks I'm crazy. They all said it was some freak storm, some strange weather pattern. But it wasn't just a storm, it was the end of everything.
I felt a surge of relief. Finally, someone who wasn't treating me like I was insane. I've been trying to tell people that, I said. I've been to news stations, the police, the hospital, everywhere, and no one believes me. They think I'm crazy. But you remember too. You know it happened. She nodded, looking at the ground for a moment, her expression softening.
I've tried to talk to people too. I keep telling them, but it's like they've all forgotten. I can't even explain it. It feels like everyone else is just living in some normal world, and I'm stuck in this nightmare that no one else can see.
I swallowed hard. This was more than just a strange coincidence. Do you think we're the only ones left who remember?
I don't know,
She said, shaking her head.
but we're the only ones talking about it. I'm starting to think maybe everyone else. I don't know, maybe they were erased from it somehow. Like, it didn't happen for them, but it happened for us.
Her words sent a chill down my spine. Erased from it, she said. It was like the idea of the disaster hadn't just been forgotten, it had been wiped away. We stood there for a moment, both of us feeling the weight of what we were saying. The truth was terrifying. If what she was saying was true, then the world was pretending like the end of everything hadn't just happened. The earth splitting, the fire raining down, the buildings crumbling. It had all been erased from history, and we were the only ones left who could remember. But why? Why were we the ones who remembered it? Why was everyone else so eager to pretend it had never happened? I didn't know the answer, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let this go. I couldn't let the world forget. I'm not crazy, I said, more to myself than to her. This happened, and I'm not going to let anyone forget it. She looked at me, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw someone who understood. Someone who wasn't going to brush it off.
We can't be the only ones,
She said softly.
There has to be someone out there who knows the truth.
We stood there together, two people in a world that had moved on while we were still stuck in the past. And for the first time I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't completely alone. The woman and I exchanged numbers, but it didn't take long before we both realized that wasn't enough. We couldn't just sit around waiting for someone else to remember, waiting for someone to come forward with an explanation. We needed answers, and we needed them fast. I spent the next few days with her. Her name was Sarah, and we worked together in secret. We couldn't risk drawing too much attention to ourselves. We knew the more we talked, the more people would start calling us crazy. But we had to know the truth. We had to figure out why we were the only ones who seemed to remember the disaster. We began by looking for any traces of the event. We started with the city center, hoping there might be remnants, evidence of something that had happened that the world had conveniently erased. But there was nothing. Everything looked perfectly normal. Streets bustling with people, buildings intact, the usual chaos of city life. But when I tried to dig deeper, talking to shop owners, workers, anyone I could find who might have been there, something strange happened. They all gave me the same blank stare, the same response. There was no disaster, they would say, as if it was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard. But the oddest part was that no one seemed shocked by the question. It was like I had asked them about something that didn't even exist, as if the event had never been a part of their reality. I could see it in Sarah's eyes that she was starting to get frustrated too.
It's like we're the only ones who know,
She muttered one day, her hand gripping the edge of a bench as we sat in a park, scanning the crowd for anyone who might share our memories. "We've got to find someone," I said. "We can't be the only two. There has to be more of us." But who could we turn to? The government? They'd already dismissed me as some kind of paranoid lunatic. News outlets, the reporters who'd mocked me wouldn't care. Everyone else was in denial. Then something shifted. We were walking down a quiet street one evening when I noticed something, an old newspaper tucked under a parked car. It was folded neatly, but something about it caught my attention. I knelt down and picked it up, unfolding it slowly. The headline was enough to make my breath catch in my throat. "Strange weather patterns rattle city. Authorities say it's just a storm." It was an old paper, probably a few days old, but that wasn't what caught me off guard. The article described strange phenomena in the skies, fireballs, flashes of light, and strange cracks in the ground. But it never once mentioned the disaster, never mentioned the truth. It talked about the storm, the weather, but the fire asteroids were completely gone from the story. "This is it," I said, my voice shaking. "This is proof." Sarah looked over my shoulder at the paper, her eyes widening.
They're covering it up.
She said softly, her face grim.
This is what happened. This is what they're calling a storm.
But what struck me the most was the date. It was from 2 days ago, the exact same date the disaster had happened. "It's like they're trying to rewrite everything," I muttered, "trying to erase it all." But why? Why would they cover up something so catastrophic? It didn't make sense. The city had been destroyed, the sky had cracked open, and millions of people had been affected. But now, it was as if it had never happened. We walked in silence for a while, trying to piece it all together, and that's when Sarah said something that sent a chill down my spine.
What if this isn't a cover-up?
She asked, her voice low.
What if it's something else? What if we didn't just witness it, but what if we saw it from another time? Like we were outside of time.
I stared at her, unsure of what she meant. "What do you mean?"
Think about it.
She said.
We saw the world fall apart, right? We saw the earth split open, the fireballs falling. But what if that wasn't our present? What if we were seeing the future?
Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. "The future?" I repeated.
Yeah.
Sarah continued, her voice growing more certain.
What if we didn't just see a disaster? We saw a future disaster. And when we woke up, we were brought back to our time, and everyone else just doesn't remember it.
I was silent for a long moment, the weight of her words sinking in. It made sense. Too much sense. The disaster felt like it was supposed to happen, like it was part of some larger timeline, not just an accident or a freak event. But if we had seen the future, why were we the only ones? Why didn't anyone else remember? We walked for hours after that, discussing the implications of what Sarah had said. It was the only explanation that felt right, but it raised even more questions than answers. And then, when we were both exhausted and on the verge of giving up, we stumbled across something that might just change everything. A small unmarked building tucked away at the edge of the city. A place I'd never seen before. And inside, we would find something we never expected. The first clue to understanding what had happened to us. But what we found there would open up a whole new mystery. One that would take us deeper into the unknown than we ever imagined. It had been a few days since we found that newspaper, and the more we tried to figure out the pieces, the more it felt like we were swimming in circles. The mystery deepened, and yet, no matter how far we dug, the truth remained hidden. We were getting closer, though. I could feel it in the pit of my stomach. I glanced at Sarah as we sat together on a bench in a quiet park, the evening sun casting long shadows across the grass. We had been talking nonstop, exchanging theories and ideas, but tonight things felt different. A quiet hum in the air, like the tension before a storm. I had grown so used to being around Sarah, her sharp wit, and her quiet intensity. She was always the one who kept me grounded, always the voice of reason. But tonight, there was something softer in her eyes, something that I hadn't seen before. She was looking at me in a way that made my heart beat faster.
What are you thinking about?
She asked, nudging me with her shoulder, a playful smile tugging at her lips. I blinked, realizing I'd been staring at her for longer than I meant to, just thinking about everything and how much we still don't know. She nodded, but then there was a brief silence. It wasn't awkward, though. It felt peaceful, like we both knew what was coming, even if we didn't want to admit it.
You know,
She said, her voice suddenly quieter than usual.
I've been thinking a lot about you lately.
I turned to her, caught off guard. What do you mean? She shrugged, glancing away for a moment like she was gathering her thoughts.
I don't know. It's just that you're really brave, and I think it's kind of cute, you know?
Her eyes met mine again, a small blush creeping up her cheeks.
The way you refuse to give up, even when everyone else is against you.
I swallowed hard, unsure how to respond. Was she saying what I thought she was saying? Sarah,
And you're kind of cute, too.
She added quickly, her voice growing a little more confident.
I mean, I don't know why, but there's something about you. I don't think I've ever met anyone quite like you.
For a moment, everything around us seemed to blur. Her words hung in the air, wrapping around my heart like a soft, unexpected embrace. I had never considered this possibility. Us. But now, with her sitting beside me, her hand just inches from mine, I couldn't ignore the feelings stirring inside me. Sarah, I whispered, my voice unsure. I think I might like you too. She smiled, her expression softening, and without another word she reached over and took my hand. The contact was electric, sending a jolt through me that I didn't know I needed until now. We sat there for a while just holding hands, both of us feeling the weight of the world and the weight of the moment. It felt like the kind of connection I'd never experienced before. It was as if, in the chaos of the disaster, we had found something real, something worth holding on to. But even in this new closeness, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. Something big. We both jumped when my phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out, glancing at the screen. It was a breaking news alert. I clicked on it, heart pounding, and then read the headline aloud. Millions of people had the same dream. Exact details. Match. Witness. Accounts. I stared at the screen in shock, and Sarah's grip on my hand tightened.
What? What is it?
She said, her voice a mixture of disbelief and curiosity. The report went on to describe the details of the dream. Fiery asteroids falling from the sky, the ground splitting open, entire cities crumbling to dust. It was everything we had seen, everything we had witnessed in that nightmare. They're calling it a dream? I muttered, my voice barely audible. This is what we saw. It's real.
Millions of people. That's not possible.
The news report described how people from all over the world had experienced the exact same thing in vivid detail, like they had all been transported to the very moment of the disaster. And the kicker, no one could explain why they all had the same dream, except that it was somehow connected to the event that had shaken the world to its core. This isn't a dream, I said, staring at the screen in disbelief. It's not a dream. This was real.
Then what does that mean?
Sarah asked, her voice trembling.
How could so many people have the same vision, the same memory of something that didn't even happen?
I don't know, I said, my head spinning, but I think we're starting to figure it out. I looked at Sarah, and in that moment I realized how much this journey had brought us together. Whatever was going on, whatever the truth was, we would face it together. I wasn't alone anymore. But as we sat there, watching the news, I couldn't help but feel like this was just the beginning. Like we were standing at the edge of something far bigger than we could ever imagine. The world had changed and we were the only ones who remembered. 2 years had passed since that strange, terrifying event, since Sarah and I had been the only two people to remember a world falling apart and being swallowed by fire and chaos. 2 years of trying to piece our lives back together to somehow move on as if we hadn't witnessed the end of the world itself. But no matter how hard we tried to live in the present, the weight of what we'd seen, the disaster, the fire asteroids, the split Earth, never left us. It clung to us like a shadow, always there, just behind us. The world had continued its pace, oblivious to the future disaster we knew was coming. But for Sarah and me, every day felt like a countdown. We had married a year ago. It was a small ceremony, just a few friends and family, but it had been perfect, if you could call it that. In some ways, it was a celebration of life, of love, of our choice to stay together through all the madness. But in others, it felt like a hollow victory, knowing that our future was already written in the stars, and that there was nothing we could do to change it. Sarah was standing beside me on the balcony of our apartment. It was late afternoon, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink, the sun dipping below the horizon. We looked out over the city, watching the hustle and bustle of daily life. People going to work, families out on walks, lights flickering on in the windows of tall skyscrapers. It looked like a perfect place, a thriving, bustling world that had no idea what was about to happen. I wrapped my arm around Sarah's shoulders and pulled her close. She didn't resist, settling her head on my shoulder as we both gazed out at the city. It was strange. How could the world be so normal when we knew what was coming? How could people smile, laugh, and live without any sense of what would soon tear everything apart?
The city looks beautiful, doesn't it?
Sarah said softly, her voice distant, almost sad. It does, I agreed, feeling the same weight in my chest. But we both know that won't last. Not for much longer. She nodded.
I keep thinking, maybe it'll be different this time. Maybe it won't happen the way we saw it. Maybe we're wrong about everything.
I shook my head, the cold truth still there in my mind, clearer than ever. We're not wrong, Sarah. I know what we saw. I know it was real. We're not imagining it.
But we can't stop it.
She said, her voice cracking with frustration.
We can't even warn anyone. What good would it do?
I didn't have an answer for that. How do you explain something so impossible? How do you convince a world that doesn't remember, a world that's still blind to the disaster, that it's all coming and coming soon? We stood there in silence, the weight of it all heavy in the air between us. The world moved on, blissfully unaware of its fate, and all we could do was watch, knowing the end was near. At that moment, a thought struck me, one that had been haunting me for weeks now. We didn't survive it, I said, barely above a whisper. We just saw it before it happened, and now we're back in the world that isn't ready for it. Sarah's breath caught, and she looked up at me, her eyes wide. We didn't need to say anything more. We both knew it was true. The city was thriving, full of life, but in a few short days it would all be gone. The earth would crack open. The fire asteroids would rain down. The cities would burn. And we, Sarah and I, would be the only ones who remembered. We didn't survive it. We just saw it before it happened. And now we're back in the world that isn't ready for it. I didn't have an answer for that. How do you explain something so impossible? How do you convince a world that doesn't remember, a world that's still blind to the disaster, that it's all coming and coming soon? We stood there in silence, the weight of it all heavy in the air between us. The world moved on, blissfully unaware of its fate, and all we could do was watch, knowing the end was near. At that moment, a thought struck me, one that had been haunting me for weeks now. We didn't survive it, I said, barely above a whisper. We just saw it before it happened, and now we're back in the world that isn't ready for it. Sarah's breath caught, and she looked up at me, her eyes wide. We didn't need to say anything more. We both knew it was true. The city was thriving, full of life, but in a few short days it would all be gone. The earth would crack open. The fire asteroids would rain down. The cities would burn. And we, Sarah and I, would be the only ones who remembered. We didn't survive it. We just saw it before it happened. And now we're back in the world that isn't ready for it.